Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm James, continuing on with my build of the Aeromite RC plane. In this video, my plan is to finish construction of the wing. I may have a few little things to do after this, but for the most part, my goal here is to get the wing completed. So let me show you what my game plan is, and then we'll start building. In the last video of this build series, this is how far I got on the wing, which was essentially laying down the spars, plugging in the ribs, the wing ribs, and then installing this leading edge piece right up here. But I made a mistake, and I mentioned it in the last video, and you can go check that out if you wish. But I'm going to bring it up here again because I think it's important to point out what happened, because it's going to impact my future steps when I put on these sort of inner ribs that we're going to be doing in this video. All right, so as I mentioned before, I misread the plans for the main spar and this rear spar here. I thought they only went to the top as it's shown kind of where the pattern is here, but they actually go all the way to the top. So they ended up being short. So to remedy that, what I did is I went back and I installed sort of this additional pieces, as you see, like right on top here. I plugged in a bunch of these little pieces to sort of make up for that gap. And you know, that kind of acts like a webbing, and structurally I think it's pretty strong, and I think it's going to be fine. And that's all I did in the last video, but then I started thinking about it more, and I got a few comments about it that I should probably do that on the rear spar as well, which I did. As you can kind of see here, I added those pieces like that. No big deal. Doesn't really add any weight because that's the size that it had to be in the first place. So in any case, there's no big deal there. I think it's going to be fine. And then the last thing I want to point out is this is the thickness of what the spar, at least the main spar up here, was supposed to be. And the same thing for the rear spar is going to be a little bit smaller, but it was thicker than what I did, as I mentioned. And the way they were supposed to work was you're going to sort of key out or basically notch out the upper part of the spar and then plug in the rib like this, and it would form it like that. And that's what I didn't do. So check out that video if you're interested in seeing that. But that's what happened. And you know, it's not that big of a deal like I mentioned. I think it's going to be okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on now. So here's the game plan for this video. So I'm going to start by putting my sub ribs in. There's a set down here and there's a set up here. And those just basically come off of the rib I already cut. Basically, I'm just going to cut it sort of right where that notch is and get that to fit in. And the front part up here is going to sandwich the dowel, which is going to be what we mount the wing to the fuselage with. So there's two sub ribs that sort of sandwich that in there. And then these two over here are there to sort of form the structure or the frame for the servo mounting blocks, which are these two guys right in here. I'll probably hold off on the mounting blocks until we get to that point later on. But in any case, those two are going to be in there like that. So in addition to that, I'm going to be putting on the leading edge sheeting, top and bottom. That's 132-inch thick sheeting. Same thing on the trailing edge. There's going to be some sheeting there, both top and bottom. And then inside of here, I'll show you on the cross section, right down here, there's this little wedge of balsa that forms sort of structure, that little kind of supports that tip area. So I'll be installing that. And that should be about it. Oh, you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to be putting on the wing tips, which is just going to be out of 1/4-inch sheet material there. And then the last thing, we'll put on these capping strips, as you see. So the sheeting and the capping strips are all 132-inch material. So the first thing I need to do, because I put this additional pieces of, I'm going to call it webbing, this 1/16-inch material, as I mentioned, for the spars, I now have two pieces in there, as you can see. And there's a step. Here's the main spar on the bottom here, and here's the piece up here on the top. So there's a step on either side of that. And what's going to happen is originally you were going to cut the rib to be flush with that, but because there's a step in it now, I'd have to kind of cut the rib in an odd shape to get it to fit right. So in order just to make it easier, I'm going to fill in the top, kind of the top of this one here, and then I'm going to fill in the bottom down there, and just kind of make that just one flush piece of wood across there. That'll make it easier. Okay, well, I got that little step out of the way. And again, you know, if you're watching this and you're just coming into this video series at this point, that step is not part of the original build. I put those little pieces in because I made a mistake on my spar earlier. So just check that other information out if you're interested and you're building this kit. Okay. All right, so now I can move on to putting in these sub ribs. I think I'm going to start with these ones in the back, these two guys right here. And I'm going to set those up, and then we'll do the ones in the front. I'm going to drill the hole also for the dowel. I'll cut the dowel and I'll drill the hole for the dowel. I'm not going to install the dowel at this point because I need to have the holes in the wing so that when I go to set it up on the plane, when I mark the holes, I'm going to use those as my marking points to mark the hole on the fuselage. So these sub ribs are now installed, and as you saw, I had to add a little bit of a gap back here, so I installed little slivers of wood to help strengthen that up. No big deal. And also I had to just kind of make some adjustments in order to get everything to fit because, again, this is wider. Both of my spars are a little bit wider now because I have those extra little pieces in there. But when I'm looking at this, and this is what's on the plan, by the way, is that these two ribs are just flush up against the spar. And these ribs are going to be supporting the aileron servo. So I thought, just for my peace of mind, I'm going to go ahead and just reinforce these two contacts right here. I have a piece of some balsa stock here. It's just a square. I think it's probably 3/16 or so. I'm just going to add one inside here. Maybe I'll go on both sides just to kind of help support those ribs, since those are going to be holding the aileron servo. I want to make sure that does not come apart. So the next step is to install the dowel, which is used to hold the wing onto the fuselage. So it's going to be a 3/16 inch diameter dowel, and I need to drill a hole through the leading edge here and a hole through the main spar, and that's just going to plug in to those locations. And then on either side of that we have these sub ribs, and those are going to be these two pieces here, which came off my rib pieces that I made earlier. And like I said, those are just going to sandwich the dowel into that location. And then I think I'm going to strengthen it up a little bit. I'm going to insert some square 3/16 inch diameter stock material on top and below the dowel itself. And I'm going to think about maybe doing a little bit of reinforcement up here in the front as well. It's probably okay as is, but you know, the leading edge is only 3/16 inch square, so it's all going to be drilled out in order to accommodate the dowel. And then there's going to be the sheeting, but that's all that there's there in that location. So I think I need to add a little bit more material in here just for my peace of mind to make it a little bit stronger. And then the way I'm going to locate the hole, I'm just going to find the center. I'm just going to measure in from my ribs right here on the leading edge and also here along the spar. Find my center location and also find the center in the spar itself, and I'll just drill through those marked locations, and that should be good. So here's my 3/16 inch drill bit, and as you can see, you know, there's not going to be much left of this little leading edge piece in here. In fact, I'm a little bit off, so it's going to probably pop up here in any case. But yeah, so there's really nothing in here. I don't know why. Probably maybe the best thing is just to cut this out and then put the dowel there. But yeah, and you can kind of see here what I'm talking about. If I put that dowel like that, there's really would have been not much of anything for that to really enclose the dowel with that leading edge. So that's all right. Let me go ahead and get this hole in the back drilled out. Sometimes it's better to do things by hand when you're dealing with balsa. Okay. All right, well, there we have it. The center section is now finished. And you know, I had a little bit of stumbles here and there with it and a little bit of trial and error with it, but I think it came out okay. So now I can move on to the sheeting. I'm going to start with the trailing edge sheeting, and then we'll move to the leading edge sheeting. And then I'll probably do the wing tips and then the cap strips. And again, I can pull out my dowel and I'll sheet it, and then I'll just open up that hole later on when we fit it onto the fuselage, and then I'll glue in the dowel later. So for my sheeting material, I have these 3-inch wide, 36-inch long sheets of 132-inch thick balsa. This stuff is very, very thin. It's almost like paper. It's so thin. So I don't really have to do too much with this. I'm just going to place it, and I'm just going to bend it over. I'm going to glue it onto the ribs. You know, if this were a thicker balsa, you could treat it when you do some sheeting using something like Windex and such to sort of like soften the wood and do that. But I don't really need to do that for this step, I don't think, because this is thin enough. I think it's going to bend fine without cracking. So, okay, so I'm going to cut my lengths out of this material here for the trailing edge, and then we'll do the leading edge. And I don't really need the plan for this. It's just going to come like about a little bit over the back of the spar, about 1/8 of an inch or so. And I'm just going to glue that down, and then I'll just press it down toward the back. And then I'll set my little piece in here, which is that little length of balsa that's going to go along the back trailing edge. And then I'll come back and do the top piece of sheeting. Then I'm going to measure just roughly how much I need. I'm going to let it hang over a little bit more to give myself some room. So probably going to go with, do about 1.5 inches, and I can always trim it. So I'll cut this into 1.5 inch wide pieces, which is basically right in half because it's 3 inches. So now that I have the sheeting attached at the spar, because there's that teardrop shape in the airfoil, the sheeting is not touching the tips of the ribs. So what I need to do, the way I'm going to do this, is I'm going to move my weights up to hold the wing down, and then I'm going to take my long straight edge, and I'm just going to wedge it below the trailing edge sheeting here, just to kind of bring it up to engage the tips of the ribs, and then I'll glue all that into place. All right, well, I think this has cured, and I can take these weights off and check it out. All right, looks pretty good. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to lay down this trailing edge sort of filler that goes right at the ends of the ribs like so. And this material is actually a little triangular piece that I picked up at my hobby shop. It's just balsa. It wasn't the exact perfect size, so I've had to kind of trim it a little bit and sand it a little bit to get it to the right shape. And I think it's close, but let me go ahead and take a look at it. But it's basically going to be in here kind of like that. And then I'll just trim off the excess sheeting material, and then we'll put our next sheet down on top of that. So there are certain moments when you're building a kit, and especially if you're building a plane off of plans like this, is that, you know, you get the instructions, you get the different methods, but sometimes you just have to kind of go for it and do what you think is going to work the best. And like I've said before, I'm no expert and I make mistakes, but you kind of just have to do that once in a while. Just try to kind of forget about trying to do anything too special and just kind of hit it and try to do your best, and usually it comes out okay. So, and if I make a mistake, try to figure out how to fix it and move on. And then when you're doing something like this, especially if you're forming, trying to carve or to shape or to sand something that's long or kind of over a large area, it's best to just try to take a little bit at a time, work with it, take a little bit, keep moving, and kind of just go back and forth instead of trying to do it all at once in one area. Kind of hit it a little bit at a time and bring it down slowly, and hopefully you'll end up with what you need. Okay, well, I worked with this for a little while and I think I got it pretty much as close as I really can get it, but I got that little wedge shaped dude in there now, and hopefully you can kind of see that. It's not perfect, but I think it's going to be good enough, you know. All right, so now that I have this piece of sheeting now attached to that rear spar, I just have to gently kind of pull this back a little bit, and I'm just going to work some thick CA down onto each of those ribs, and I'm just going to clamp them, kind of clamp them down along each rib to hold it down while it cures. Now this is a small wing, and this sheeting, as I mentioned, is very flexible. If this was a larger wing or something like this, I'd probably have to prop it up differently, maybe add some weights and some other methods just to kind of get that curve to go all the way down. But this is a relatively short distance, and I just need to just kind of clamp each one, and I think it'll be okay. So let me go ahead and get my clamps and my glue, and we'll get going. All right, well, I realize I may get a little bit of denting of the balsa with all the little clamps. I don't intend to leave them on too long, but if I do, I'll have to kind of sand that out if it's bad. I don't think it's going to be too bad, but really I don't know. This is kind of the way I thought about doing it this time. You may have suggestions otherwise. Like I mentioned, there's a variety of ways of doing this, but this seemed to work out the best. And the other thing also is, you know, the CA glue, the thick CA like this stuff here, it takes a while for it to cure. So I put a nice little blob on each one of those ribs inside there, and anticipating that it'll drip down in toward like the very, very bottom when it gets next to that spar as well. So I think this is going to work out okay. We'll let it cure, and we'll come back and take our clamps off. I don't want them to stay on there too long. Now for the leading edge sheeting. So I'm going to take one piece, again, of my 132-inch thick balsa sheeting. And my plan is, of course, to cut it to the right size. So I'm going to just take it and put it here on the leading edge, like so. And then just bend it over the top of the rib, like that. And I'm just going to estimate about 1/8 of an inch beyond the spar. So I'll trim the whole thing down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the sheet to the leading edge, like so, and get that glued on with my CA glue. And then once that's cured, I'm just going to I'm going to put my CA glue on the ribs, and I'm just going to lay it down like this. And I'm just going to hold the sheeting down by just basically putting my straight edge on top of it with some weights, and just hold it down in place and let it cure, and then I'll flip it over and I'll do the other side. So that sheet is attached. Now I realized that probably looked a little cumbersome because I was just sort of working along the edge and applying my CA glue. I ran out of my Starbond glue, so I just used some Loctite CA. It's kind of a medium, you know, it's your typical CA glue you get at the hardware store. It works fine. But anyhow, I just sort of worked it along this edge. You know, this is a small plane, and this little sheet is very thin and I can work with it. I have time. So if it was a bigger plane with thicker sheeting and such, we would do a little bit differently with clamps and weights and things like that. But I think this worked out okay. So now the next step now is going to be we're going to apply some thick CA along all of the ribs, and I'm going to lay this down and we're going to weight it down like so and let it cure and come back and do the other side. And that's the nice thing about working with a thick CA, is that you have time. You have several minutes before it really sets up, so you have plenty of time to work with it. So I'll let this sit for a few minutes and cure up. Now again, I would like to stress that I was using that thick CA, and you know, I mentioned you have plenty of time, but that was relative to, I should have clarified, to a small plane like this. I'm not covering a lot of area, and you know, for a bigger wing, probably would have to do this with like your just standard like wood glue or like something like that. CAs may be a little bit too quick for a bigger wing, but for this I think it works okay. So I made a couple little adjustments off camera just to make sure everything was good. I checked it, but I just wanted to show you how I got that to lay down. So I'll let this cure for a little bit. We'll come back and pull it off and we'll do the other side. All right, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to do the same exact thing for this side now. I also forgot to mention that I actually need to put some sheeting in the center here and on the wingtip areas. I forgot to see that. I saw that on the plan just now, and I remembered I have to do that also. So it's been a little while, about a little over an hour or so since I did this glue, the CA glue, so I think it's probably good to go here. Let's take a look at the final product of the leading edge sheeting. And yeah, one thing I am learning is, you know, this is a small plane, and I've built a few small planes, but the last couple planes I've built were actually, you know, a lot bigger than this. And I have to be careful not to crack or break this very thin balsa. You can kind of see I got a little chunk right here that I knocked off, but in any case. So now what I need to do is I need to move on to this additional sheeting, which is in the center of the plane here. There's going to be panels on both sides here. Then we'll cut out a window for the servo, and then we also have sheeting on both sides at the wingtips. And then from there we'll move on to our cap strips and then our ends here. And then just to show you on the plan, so here you see the sheeting here in the center section, which again is our 132 sheet material. And then on both tips out here we have it here and over here. And then I'll note that my sheet is a 3-inch wide sheet, which doesn't reach all the way to this sheet here, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the pieces and lay down like the bigger panels all the way where I need to do it, and then I'll come back and I'll fill in these little parts here. So now the sheeting is finished, and you know it's rough on the tips out here on the edges. I'm gonna have to trim that down when we get to that point, but right now that's just the way it is, and it's lined up on the inner portions here, so that's fine and it looks okay. And one thing I wanted to point out is that if you notice those little red dots, I have 2 up here and 2 right down here. Those are the locations of those sort of like the sub ribs that are going to be used, or where the mounting blocks are going to be for that aileron servo. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this window out in a little bit, but those are going to be my guide so I know where those ribs are. Okay, so now the next step is to move on to the cap strips. So let's take a look at the cap strips on the plan. So here they are. There's one on each rib, on the top and the bottom. And all that's doing is, it's the 132-inch thick material. All that's doing is bridging the surface between the leading edge sheeting and the trailing edge sheeting. If you didn't do this, you'd have you wouldn't have anything to support the covering material in these areas. There'd be a little gap between the covering material and the top of the rib. So this just fills in that space. So it's pretty easy to do. And the way I'm going to do it is, these are 1/4 inch wide, by the way. So I'm just going to use my X-Acto and a straight edge and just cut some pieces. These are actually left over from the sheeting that I was doing previously here on the wing. So I'm going to trim these down to a 1/4 inch wide, and I'll start with those. Should be pretty simple. I'm just going to take each one, I'm going to cut it to the right size per each of the ribs. I'm just going to line it up on the front up here, and then line it up down here, cut it, and then just glue it on with my CA. Well, the cap strips are all finished, and that was pretty easy and fun. So now I'm going to move on to the tips of the wing, which are right here, shown here. And this is just made out of 1/4 inch balsa sheeting. And I just have a piece of scrap from some old kid or something. I don't know where I got it. Looks like it's an old stabilizer or something. But it's 1/4 inch thick, and I think I can cut the sizes I need out of this. But the first thing I have to do is I have to trim edges back and get that all evened out with all that extra material taken off before I can put the tip on. So I'm going to do that first. All right, well that looks pretty decent. The hardest part about that was trying to get it on the camera. It was kind of difficult, kind of holding it and everything. But in any case, now I can go ahead and trace this shape onto my little piece of stock material here that I mentioned that I have. I'm thinking maybe I can do something like this. Maybe put one like that and trace that on there, and then maybe trace another one over here. So let me take a look at it, and I think I can do that. Let's check it out. Okay, I think this is going to work. Now I'm not going to cut these to those lines. I'm going to cut them rough, and then I'm going to just glue them onto the ends, and then I'll come back and carve them and sand them to the proper shape. We'll let this cure and then come back and I will trim them and sand them to the right shape. Alright, so now I'm ready to go ahead and finish off these wingtips. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down a couple layers of tape here along the inside of the wingtip, like so. And I'm going to do this to protect the wood so that I don't ding it up or scratch it or sand too much of this sort of delicate area. I'm going to protect it with this masking tape and then take it off when I'm finished. But that's a good way to protect areas that you don't want to overly sand too much or cut into by accident. Well, all right, so I've been working, as you saw, with the wingtips, and you know, I'm just eyeballing it. I'm just taking my time and going back and forth. And what I'll do is I'll set the wing down probably on the floor, and I'll look at it and make sure the tips look like they're pretty close and such. But overall, you know, it's not too hard. You know, you just kind of work on one area for a little while and then kind of take a mental note, and then you go to the other side and work that for a little bit and do the same kind of thing, and then just work back and forth, and you should be able to get it to come out pretty even on both sides. Now, in addition to that, I need to just go through and just kind of give this a nice sanding across the whole wing in these areas with the like where the cap strips are and everything else, where you get these little seams and such. And then on the leading edge where the two pieces of sheeting came together here, I just need to sand that, kind of round that off. So let me go ahead and spend a little bit of time doing that, and then we'll come back and we'll open up this little hole right here for the aileron, and also open up the hole up here for the dowel. Well, okay, well that was a pretty long video. That's probably one of the longest videos I've done, and I covered a lot of ground in this video, but the wing is now complete, it's finished. The only thing I have to do for the wing is to make the ailerons, but we'll do that in a future video. But everything else I think came out okay. I'll take it out into the sunlight and make sure everything looks okay. I'll check it to make sure I sanded and everything is pretty much as smooth as I can get it, and also, you know, as symmetric as I can get it with the wingtips and such. But overall, I'm happy with how it came out. So, you know, thanks a lot for hanging in there on this video. It was quite a long one, like I said. And as always, thanks for watching my channel. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.